Great. I think the numbers have settled, so we can get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Alvaro. I am part of the steering group of the Climate Investment Challenge. I'm joined by Rafa, Bianca, Phil, Philip, and Kai, part of the team as well. I will be hosting most of the session, but the team will be helping me present some of the most successful ideas from last year. So I'll be doing most of the talking for the first 20 minutes, then I'll hand it off to the team, and then it'll come back to me to close it off. We do want to leave about 15-20 minutes for Q&A. So we'll probably finish doing all of our talking from our end in about 40 minutes. Last week, we hosted another webinar, and based on that, I know that the questions at the very end are really, really good. So I would certainly encourage you to stay online after the initial first 40 minutes. So let me share my screen, and then we can get started. And full screen mode. Great. Can you guys see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, we can.
Great, fantastic. Okay, let me minimize this. Perfect. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. Just a quick note on the admin. There will be things that are unclear. There will be, I'm sure, questions on your end. So I would encourage you to drop in your questions in the chat. We will spend, as I said, 15-20 minutes at the end, and we will take those questions one by one and answer them all. So also a really good reason to stay on for the rest of the presentation. So what we want to achieve over the next 40 minutes is to cover all these areas. So we will begin with a bit of background on what the competition is, what we're trying to achieve with the competition, and what are the key dates. We'll talk about the deadline and some of the dates, some of those key dates after the deadline, the initial deadline. Second, we want to talk about the types of ideas that were submitted last year. We will be presenting 4 broad categories, 4 broad buckets that ideas sort of fit into last year. And then we'll go into our presentation, 15 or 20 minutes, presenting 5 of the top ideas that were submitted last year. And the idea here is that it'll give you a good indication, sort of a good background on the sorts of problems, the sorts of challenges students were focused on, and also the way they sort of presented it and built a case around their proposals. On number 4, we'll talk about what's next for you. How do you submit an application? What are the expectations that we have in terms of that initial concept note submission? And then, as I said, we'll open it for Q&A. So if there's any questions, again, leave your questions in the chat. So let's get started. So what is the Climate Investment Challenge? So the Climate Investment Challenge is a pitch competition that aims to for students to develop creative financial solutions and innovations that address one of the many challenges and issues created by climate change. The main word to focus here is in innovation. Innovation around financial solutions, innovation around business models, innovation around technology, and also innovation around untapped climate opportunities. You could certainly focus on, innovation on all those different parameters, business models, financial innovation, tech innovation, and also untapped opportunities. But what we want to see is ideas that deal with innovation for all of these areas around climate change. What the competition isn't is to try to recreate what has already been done. We know how to finance and how to implement a large-scale solar, large-scale wind. The world has been doing this for the last decade or so. So we know how to do that really well. What we want to ask you is to focus on areas around climate change that we are probably not fully great at deploying, at investing in. So we want you to focus on those areas of innovation. The deadline to submit, to participate in the competition, to submit a concept note, is on February 21st. So it's a little bit over 2.5 weeks away. And as you probably know, we are awarding £15,000 between the winning team and the runner-up team. So let's talk about some of the key dates beyond that Feb 21st deadline. So again, the Feb 21st deadline, that's for a concept note submissions. So each team has to submit a concept note. There is a template on the website. We will be talking about the expectations from our end in terms of the submission. 2.5 weeks after that Feb 21st deadline, we will be making decisions. We will be letting you know who will be moving into what we call the semi-finalist round. And we will be providing, to those that make it through, and on request, we will be providing feedback and guidance as you prepare for preparing your semi-finalist deck presentations. The deadline for the submission of those presentations for those teams that do move on to the semi-final is March 28th. So that's when you will have to submit a presentation. And then 2.5, 3 weeks later, we will be making decisions. We will be letting you know who of the final or semi-finalists will be moving on to the final. And then a month later, a little bit over a month later, in late May, we will be hosting the virtual finale. And for that, we will be selecting the top 5 or the top 10 ideas to present live at a live event in front of a panel of judges. Obviously, it'll be most likely a virtual event, of course. But it'll be somewhere between 5 or the top 10 ideas submitted from around the world. So let's talk about what sorts of ideas were submitted last year. So we're focusing on the submissions from last year. And in general, the ideas we received, they fell into four broad categories, 4 buckets. The first of these categories was specialized funding vehicles. And specialized funding vehicles came in sort of 2 different variations. The first variation was what we call, specialized funding structure. So basically a team proposing an innovative way of financing projects. And these specialized financing structure, the specialized business models, were focused on traditional projects that we're familiar with, perhaps wind and solar, but using specialized business models to finance those projects. The second variation of this is sort of the opposite. So it's using financial structures, financial approaches, business models that we are familiar with, that the industry is familiar with, but using those to finance specialized projects. So perhaps those could be projects that are focused on agriculture or farming in emerging economies that perhaps have not been looked at before. So it would be using ways of finance that we're used to, that the industry is used to, but for these specialized projects. The second category of ideas submitted is around risk mitigation. So this is all around climate risk. And we also received sort of different variations of this. The first one is insurance products. So thinking about the impacts that climate is having on different regions of the world. So if we're thinking about sub-Saharan Africa, it could be around droughts. If we're thinking about Southeast Asia, it could be around severe thunderstorms. So the submissions that we received, some of these focused on developing insurance products tailored to the climate risk that these regions are facing. The other type of a risk mitigation product we received was risk quantification tools. So a number of submissions were around methodological ways to quantify the climate risk of corporates or projects, so that investors will be better able to allocate their funds, their investments. So one of the challenges that investors are facing today is understanding whether the projects they're investing in are going to be vulnerable, are going to be susceptible in the future to climate change. And so these ideas, these methodological quantification approaches, targeted that issue, that challenge that investors are facing when they think about where to put their money. The third category, microcredit schemes. So these were proposals that looking at small targeted micro loan projects, targeting climate adaptation use cases. And again, generally in emerging economies. So again, if we think about Sub-Saharan Africa, if we think about Southeast Asia, if we're thinking about the Arctic, perhaps, these would be schemes in which an operating company will sort of distribute microloans so that local communities, local residents are able to invest a little bit of capital into climate adaptation technology so that they can better face the changing climate. And then the fourth category, specialized bonds. And again, these proposals came in two different ways, two different flavors. The first variation, it's innovative tweaks, innovative elements incorporated into the structure of bonds. So, you know, the industry understands bonds. We understand bonds very well. There's a general structure around them, but a bunch of teams submitted ideas that focused on modifying the structure and the way bonds operate to make them more attractive to investors that are looking to put money into climate projects. The other variation of specialized bonds was using the traditional structure of bonds that we're used to, but applying it to finance very specialized projects. So these could be projects that are focused on carbon offsets exclusively, or these could be projects that are focused on plastic offsets exclusively. So maybe taking a step back, the ideas that we received last year, they sort of fell into these different broad categories of ideas. Our expectation is that, you know, perhaps what we received last year will resemble that, and hopefully this gives you an idea of how to frame your thinking, how to frame the proposal that you might be thinking about, and where it fits sort of in the landscape of ideas that we received last year. So let's move on from this to think about the evaluation criteria that we are going to be considering. And we're going to be moving on to the presentations in a little bit, in a few minutes. But I do want to highlight these four areas that we will be thinking about when we review the ideas. The first is innovation. So we will be looking at how innovative your idea is. Is it replicating the wheel? Is it something that we've done before, or is it something totally new? Is it innovation around finance? Is it innovation around business models? Is it innovation around technology? Or is it innovation across all those areas? Number two is an implementation feasibility. To us and to the judges and to the sponsors of the competition, it is really important to know and understand whether these proposals can actually materialize, can actually become something in a few years. And this was one of the key criteria for judges to choose last year's winners. Is this an idea that can actually be implemented? Is this something that the sector can adopt and deploy in a few years? Number three, scalability. This is around whether your proposal has potential to be replicated and scaled across other regions, can be scaled across other sectors, can be scaled across other areas in general. Is this something that can only be deployed in a very niche case, in a very specific geography, or can it be taken, borrowed, and applied in other different areas, other different geographies, other different sectors? And number four, climate impact. Obviously, the competition is focused on climate change. So we want you to help us understand whether your idea, you know, focuses on climate change at a global level, whether it's focused on localized pollution, whether it's focused on the mitigation of emissions, or whether it's focused on the adaptation of communities to a changing climate. So help us understand what the climate impact is of your proposal. So now let's move on to the third area that we wanted to talk about. So these are the ideas, some of the ideas that were really successful last year. And these are, we're looking on the screen right now, the top 9 ideas submitted last year. We will be presenting 5 of these. And this is sort of the areas where they fell into in terms of the 4 categories that I presented previously. So I'm going to kick us off with number 8, convertible emissions performance bond. And then I'm going to pass it off to Rafa, Bianca, Kai, and Philip to present the other ideas. And then once everybody gets a chance to present these ideas, it's gonna come back to me, and then I'm gonna give you the big picture of why these ideas were innovative, why judges really like the ideas, and hopefully that'll be helpful as you're thinking of the ideas that you can propose. So let's move on to the ideas. So the first idea is the convertible emissions performance bond. So this is an idea that was submitted by a team of MBAs and PhD students from the Imperial College Business School, and the challenge that they were trying to answer was the fact that there isn't enough investment, there isn't enough capital flowing into climate-related projects globally. So because their question was more broad, this is an idea that didn't really target a particular sector. This is not really focused on the energy sector, or infrastructure, or agriculture. This is an idea that addresses all sectors as a whole. And again, the point here is, why is there not enough investment capital flowing into climate-related projects? They identified some solutions, some really awesome solutions that are in the market today. There's carbon taxes, there's cap and trade, there's climate bonds, but all of these ideas are facing issues. They each face their own challenges. On carbon taxes, there is no upper bound on emissions. As long as I can pay my carbon tax, I can emit as much as I want. Cap and trade, there's a lot of exemptions that different sectors get different subsidies, and so it sort of undermines the effectiveness of cap and trade. And climate bonds face the issue around, there's a bit of uncertainty around how do you qualify whether a project is worthy of being included into a climate bond, and how do you measure the impact of the projects underlining this climate bond. So the solution that the team from Imperial proposed was to develop a bond that would be more attractive to investors and that would only target green projects. Now, the innovative element of this was the variation of the bonds. So bonds today, the way bonds work is that an investor will purchase a fixed term bond from an issuer. And perhaps every 6 months or every year, the issuer will pay interest back to the investors. What the team proposed was to change this structure slightly. That would allow the investor to convert their stake in the project simply from holding a bond to being able to hold equity, to being able to hold stock in the different projects, so that they would be able to have the upside on whether the projects are successful in the future. And the ability for the investors to convert that holding the bond to holding equity and holding stock in the projects would be based on whether the emissions underlying the bond would be met. So if the emissions were met at the end of the bond, the investor would be able to convert the bond into common stock and be able to reap increased revenues in the future. If the projects underlying the bond did not meet the emissions targets that they were intended to meet, there would be no conversion ability for the investor. So the investor would simply get the principal back, and they would just get the interest back from the issuer. So no upside for the investor. Why was this attractive? Because for investors, this would mean that they would have returns that could be 2 times as high as just a regular conventional bond. And why was this attractive to issuers? Was because they would be able to have a cheaper form of financing. So, and as you see on the screen, it's generally 1 to 2% cheaper than getting financing through conventional bonds. So that's the first idea. So now let me hand it off to Rafa for the Sustainable Cattle Farming Fund.
Thank you, Alvaro. Hi, everyone. So this is the Sustainable Cattle Farming Fund. Can we go to the next slide? This idea was submitted by a team that was also actually very diverse. So not all had a finance background. I believe only one person in the team had it. And this is the perfect example. You don't have to have that finance background or that MBA background to apply. And here's how the fund was structured. So basically, the problem is huge, right? The cattle industry contributes to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and that's primarily driven by that translates into deforestation, loss of biodiversity in the Amazon area is huge, right? Already we have lost 15% of the Amazon rainforest. And it is a lot due to cattle ranching, a lot in Brazil. So that the impact, the climate impact that we can have is very, very tangible, very evident. Next slide. Now, the solution that this team came up with is a fund that provides Brazilian ranchers debt financing. So by itself, the debt financing is doesn't have any innovation in the financial aspect. However, the team innovated in what comes together with that debt, right? And that is what you can see here in this screen. So it's a series of services that help cattle ranchers that will receive these loans to make sure that they turn from unsustainable activities to sustainable practices. And this is particularly important because this is a market segment that is not well provided today by current financial service providers in Brazil. Next. Then the team goes into a lot more detail, right? And I suggest you check out later in your day the video that we have on our website. But basically on the left side, you can see the flow of funds. So that is how money moves from what hands to what hands and which stakeholders are involved. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the key statistics that they included. Now, keep in mind that this is an excerpt of the presentation the team used in the summer when they were pitching, when they were already on the final selection part of the process. Now, you will be expected to provide numbers and the sound logic behind it, but if you pass to those to that final stage, so be sure to have that on top of mind from the beginning, but it's not necessary to go into so much detail at the concept note, and we will talk more about that later. But yeah, this was a great example of how the team did touch upon it from the beginning and then went into much more depth in the presentation. Now, why did we like this project? Well, the first thing is the scalability part of it and the feasibility of it. So it may sound counterintuitive because the sustainable cattle farming in Brazil is something very niche. So on one hand side, we like that because it's very evident how we can have an impact in one particular region, in one particular sector. On the other hand, the instrument and the structure that the team proposes is easily scalable and replicable in other industries, say palm oil or poultry or any other agricultural industry that needs to move to sustainable practices. In addition to that, the impact was very evident, right? And they had some innovation points here and there in the application and really like looking at a sector that hasn't been looked at before. So that was the Sustainable Cattle Farming Fund. And now on to Bianca for the next idea.
Great, thank you, Rafa. So one of the other specialized funding vehicles we saw last year, which was also the winning idea, really down to the implementation feasibility of the idea, was the Sustainable Timber Real Estate Investment Trust. And this came from a great team at the University of Cambridge, again, very diverse background, engineers and finance as well. So if we go to the next slide. So the problem that they were trying to address was the huge amount of carbon emissions we see in the construction material supply chain. So in the traditional construction of property, they highlighted that there's a large reliance on steel and concrete, which is obviously very high carbon intensive materials, especially in those mid to high rise structures. The team also identified that by 2050, there's going to be an additional 2.5 billion people living in the urban environment. So really this problem is just going to be exacerbated. So they wanted to tackle that problem specifically on the material supply chain of the real estate value chain. So we go to the next slide. So their solution to this was to use timber as an alternative. So instead of those traditional construction materials we see, which are high carbon intensity, such as concrete and steel, this was really innovative because it could reduce carbon emissions by up to 50%. The other main point of it was very feasible because it's already been a tested technology. The materials were used throughout the world already in property, and also it's financially feasible. It came at competitive cost compared to those traditional construction materials. And then they were looking at also using sustainable forest management techniques. So that would avoid the issue of deforestation in the value chain. We'll go to the next one. And in terms of the financial solution, the team came up with a financial solution of a REIT, so real estate investment trust. And this is a widely used investment vehicle already in industry, which made the implementation feasibility of this idea really strong, which the judges really liked here. So the way that this was different and innovative, though, was that it addressed the climate problem and that it was only going to be investing in timber real estate. So partnering with multi-developers to help incentivize carbon neutral property development. They also wanted to target institutional investors who wanted to integrate ESG factors into their investment portfolio. And the team structured this REIT so that it would invest in properties in line with really strict investment criteria we see here. So they detailed this out in terms of it needed to be a grade A office with an experienced property manager and generating rental income at the time of acquisition. They would then get rental income to the REIT, which would then ultimately be provided to the unit holders as distributions. So if we go to the final slide. So overall, the team were able to design an instrument that was already widely used, but with a different sustainable impact to it. So it would help mobilize capital from ESG investors to building developers, which would incentivize partner developers to replace those traditional materials with timber materials. So really reducing those emissions, and then hoping in the long term to increase worldwide adoption and raise public awareness of sustainable building materials. So this idea won really because of their strong implementation feasibility, with REITs a very familiar funding vehicle for the industry, and it also had that innovative aspect which really addressed the clear climate problem. I now hand over to Kai to hear about Waste to Worth, another great funding vehicle.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to talk about Waste to Worth, an idea by the Imperial College. And this idea was how to make waste financially attractive to recycle. And if we go to the next page, we can see the problem was that at the moment there's a ban on conventional plastics, and they get now used biodegradable plastic, which needs specific waste management. And at the moment, only 5% is recycled, 65% ends up in landfills, and 30% is dumped in the environment. So the solution would be foreign direct investment to finance the waste management. But at the moment, this waste management does not have the specific return profile for investors to invest in it. So there are international corporations, next slide please, where they have initiatives with regards to plastic waste offsetting. So just like you would offset your carbon for flights when you took a flight, they pay for the plastic they offset of the project. And the project actually works that waste management facilities get verified by a gold standard, and for each metric ton of waste they recycle, they get 1 credit point, and they can sell those credit points to the multinational corporations like Unilever, Henkel, or BASF. So the waste management companies now can not only sell the output, but they can also sell the credit points and can increase their profit by 40%. And what you can see is that the demand at the moment for such projects is higher than the supply. And if we go to the next page, you can see that Waste to Worth is actually at the moment structured as a private equity vehicle. Actually, they can take on many projects as they are not limited to only one investment. And therefore, it is a great idea because on the one side, it is innovative because they can mitigate the effects of waste pollution. It is feasible because it has attractive returns. It can has a 40% higher return profile. It is also scalable because it's structured as a private equity fund and can take on many investments. And also the climate impact can be measured by a metric ton of waste recycled, and is therefore also nice and measurable. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kai. Over to you, Philip.
Yes, the next idea looks at how corporations can measure risks from climate change, and was created by 2 British PhD students that also do not have a finance background. And they propose a model that is very flexible and holistic. So it works for big and small companies. And this is kind of different to the other ideas presented here. A bit unusual, you could say, because it is not directly a financial product, but more of a methodology, a framework. And on this slide here, you can see that measuring climate risk actually matters, because it can have an effect on firm valuations. It could be a nudge factor in portfolio constructions and inform even rating agencies or insurances, as often these
Oh, I'm not sure. Can we still hear Philip?
I think he froze for a second.
Can you?
Oh, we can hear you now, Philip. Great.
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah. You can see that only 39% of S&P companies actually integrated those risks. And a good score could even be beneficial to a company because it could, for example, lower your insurance premiums. Next slide, please. Perfect. The students suggest a framework which uses a supply chain of a company as a base. And then for each step in the supply chain, they calculate the risk. And in the end, they aggregate that risk over the supply chain. And to calculate the risk for each step, they look at the 6 factors listed here: physical damage, increase in cost of capital, changes in price of raw materials, change in demand, reputation, and regulatory risks for the businesses. So it's a very holistic view. Next slide, please. And here you can see very nicely in this model how they have those different steps in the supply chain, and they look at the production and the distribution. So what happens before and after, and then they weigh each step depending on how close it is to their company, and get like a final risk score for each corporation. Next slide, please. Yes, scalability is given as the model is very flexible and can be adapted to different industries. And they point out that a problem might be getting appropriate data, because you cannot look at each step of the supply chain. You don't have access to their data, but they propose a solution as third-party vendors could provide this data. So all in all, they address 2 evaluation criteria directly: the feasibility and scalability. And they even point out the constraints with a solution. And regarding the other evaluation criteria, they use an innovative approach to a known problem with their framework. And their impact on climate change is also given, as it can have an impact on asset allocation in the future. Yes, perfect.
Great, thanks everybody. So those were 5 of the top 10 ideas that we received last year. Every individual idea was unique in its own way. Every idea sort of focused on a different sector. As Philip was saying, this last idea, number 5, climate risk quantification metrics, this was unique in that, unlike the others, it did not provide a financial element to it. The idea was around the methodological quantification approach, so that investors would be able to use this approach in determine where it makes most sense for them to allocate their investment. The idea that I presented, the convertible emission performance bond, unlike the other 3, 1, 2, or 3, it didn't address any specific sectors. It didn't target any sectors. It was an idea that could be broadly employed for any type of projects underneath the bond. Waste to worth, super innovative, targeting plastic offsets. It sort of faces the challenges that it isn't an idea that could be deployed tomorrow, because there isn't a market for plastic offsets today, but there is a ton of interest from industry to be able to get there. Sustainable Cattle Farming Fund, looking at a really, really hot topic in Brazil, sustainable cattle farming down there, and providing an idea that goes beyond a simple financing of projects for cattle farmers down there. And as Bianca said, the Sustainable Timber REIT, they won last year. Why? Because the industry is familiar, the industry is comfortable with using a real estate investment trust as a way to finance real estate. What the innovation in that idea was replacing traditional building materials with a much more sustainable option, which would be sustainable timber. So hopefully that's helpful. That's just a small sample set of the ideas that we received last year. Every idea innovative in its own way. Every idea addresses those evaluation criteria that I mentioned initially. They all have their pros, but they also have their cons. Just something else to consider. So moving on to what happens next for you. How do you submit an application? You might have noticed on the application portal of the website, you can download a concept note. So there is a template for you to fill out. The expectations from our end in terms of that concept note is that your submission should not be more than 4 pages. Anywhere from 2 to 4 pages is realistic. We're not really asking you to write a PhD proposal. The idea here is for us to get a high-level understanding of your submission. There is no expectation for you to develop a robust financial model, a set of cash flows. That's not a requirement at this stage of the competition. It will be later on in the semifinal stage, so that you'll be able to sort of support your idea with more with an actual financial model. But at this stage, in the concept note submission stage, there isn't a requirement for this. So what's in the concept note itself? So there's 5 fields. The first field basically answers the question, what is the problem and what is the solution you're proposing? The second field, we want to understand the stakeholders. We want to understand who is involved, who is going to be funding, who is going to be developing the project, who are the target customers. We want to understand how the cash flows from investments down to the operating company, down to the individual customers, and then back up to the investors in the way of returns. We want to understand who does what, who's doing the funding, who is providing services, who is providing technical support. The best way you may be able to do that is if you use a stakeholder map or a diagram, and that's a really helpful way for us to understand what you're proposing. The third field, we want to understand if the proposal is feasible. Again, we're not expecting a full-fledged financial model, but we do want some sort of high-level calculations that support that, this is an idea that is actually feasible. It could actually be deployed. The fourth field, related to climate, we want to understand the emissions, the climate impact, whether this is related to avoided emissions, localized pollution, or whether this is a project around climate adaptation. And then the final field, the fifth field, we want you to help us understand whether your idea, your proposal is scalable and replicable to other regions, other areas, other sectors. Again, the deadline for submitting the concept notes is February 21st, and you can download it in the application portal on the Apply tab of the website. A few things to be aware before we answer a lot of the questions that came in. If you go to the homepage of the website, there is a register your interest button at the top right. If you do register, you will be getting our newsletter. The importance of the newsletter, and this is really important, is the fact that we're providing a bit of inspiration on every single week up until the deadline, and in terms of what are ideas that could work, what are some of the challenges that the industry is facing as a whole, and maybe that'll help you think about the type of project that you want to propose. And the second thing to be aware of here is we have a LinkedIn group. If you go on LinkedIn and you search Climate Investment Challenge, we have a group that is also an avenue for us to provide some inspiration, to give you things to think about, and also give you some insights in terms of what worked and what didn't last year. And then the final thing before we move on to the Q&A, on our website, if you go to the 2020 results page, you will see the video presentations from last year, the finale, and also the detailed presentation decks that were submitted for the top 5 ideas. And these top 5 ideas are, you can see them in light blue on the screen. So some of the ones that we presented today, Waste to Worth, Sustainable Cattle Farming Fund, and Sustainable Timber REIT, and also the Convertible Emissions Performance Bond. You can see the videos behind those ideas from last year, and you can also see the presentations from last year. So that should be super helpful for you as you're thinking about what ideas to submit. Again, Rafa made a really good point earlier. Those ideas are reflective of a team that sort of made it to the very end of the competition. We're not expecting a full-fledged idea, financial model behind your proposals at this stage. All we're expecting is, as I said, that 2 to 4 page concept note for us to better understand the idea that you're proposing to look at. So that's it for the main part of the presentation. I promised to keep it under 40 minutes, and I went a little bit over, but we still have a good amount of time for Q&A. So Rafa, if you've got questions that came in the last 40 minutes, let's take them up one by one.
Yes, thank you so much, Alvaro. This all has been great information. And please remember, one of the questions is from Omar. In terms of recordings, of course, you can see the videos in our website. There is so much there. For the recordings of these webinars, we will be uploading those to the LinkedIn group. So go right now, join our LinkedIn group, and then as soon as we have the recordings edited, we will upload them there. Right, so you can always refresh on the information that Alvaro just gave us. We have a couple of questions, Alvaro. Abhishek is asking us, and I saw that Bianca already answered. But they're asking for a sample proposal. Sorry,
Yep.
in regards to content, format, etc. Just I just want to bring this up and tell Abhishek we will have that, right? Like
we are going to be uploading a completed concept note template from last year. It'll be for one of these ideas that we presented today, and hopefully that template will be a good reference point for you as you begin to complete your concept note.
Exactly.
And so we will have it available for download on the application portal, so on the apply page of the website.
Exactly, and we will let you know on the group when that is up, so you can go immediately. In the meantime, we hope that you still are thinking through the ideas. There is one more thing that we have available for you, and that's our newsletter. So in the LinkedIn group, we will also send a link to that newsletter, because I know that our marketing team has been putting together a lot of information on different ideas outside of the challenge, stuff for everyone to start getting inspiration, and then hopefully in a few days submit the application. Then that was a question we had from Abhishek. Victor is asking us, has any of the proposals submitted last year been implemented?
So we understand that some of the proposals went on to win other challenges. It was actually one of the ones we didn't present that went on to win another challenge in Southeast Asia and raise some additional funding. We're still understanding at what stage the proposals are, and what we're trying to work internally is to set up a structure so that, you know, if you make it through to the competition, you can continue to pursue your ideas through some sort of a climate accelerator. So we're trying to connect the dots, and we will try to do that so that you'll be able to pursue your ideas later on, and it doesn't end with the competition. We want to support you beyond the competition.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And on that note, in terms of content and resources, we will have an interview uploaded this week with the team that won last year, and they talk about how the progress has been for them, what they've done afterwards, and kind of like the challenges they face in the real world once after the idea wins this climate investment challenge. So don't miss that. We have another question in terms of ties nicely to this one in terms of ideas. They say, my question is, how mature or developed does the concept note need to be? Could it be an early stage idea?
Absolutely. As I said in the beginning, we don't want you to try to recreate the wheel. We want the idea to be innovative and in many areas. And by extension, that means that your ideas will likely not be something that is out in the market, or something that is almost ready to go out in the market. We understand that, and we understand that the ideas may just be at the conceptual stage, and maybe most of them will be at the conceptual stage, which is what we saw last year. That's absolutely fine. That's that's basically why we have the competition. We want to see the very best innovative ideas that students in universities around the world are thinking about.
Fantastic. An anonymous attendee is asking us, I know you said we don't have to have a finance background, that's correct. Does that mean our concept note could include what we imagine it will be financially, and will then get further mentorship in that area if we progress to the competition? Two really good questions. Alvaro?
Sure. So in terms of the financed element of the concept note submission, as I said earlier, we don't want to see a full-fledged financial model. What we do want to see is for you to give us an indication that, yeah, your idea has a positive IRR, and an investor would be interested in your idea. And you can do that perhaps by looking at comparable projects, comparable proposals in that same similar space that you're thinking about. So we're not expecting a financial model at this point to support your idea. Later on, if you make it onto the semifinal stage, we do want to see some cash flows. We do want you to think about the revenues, the investment, and how that turns into an IRR, what the revenues are for the returns are for investors. So we do want to see at some point, at a point later in the competition, some actual financial cash flows. But it doesn't take a finance background to put some cash flows together.
Exactly. And if I may add to that, at this stage, it's very important that we start thinking, we as participants, that it is financially feasible, right? So even if we're not expecting right now to have the exact numbers there, we do want to see the logic behind how this can be attractive for investors, how this could have a profit as well as a climate impact, right? So that's, of course, just put as much information as you want, as you think it's important, but definitely as an advice, like make that point across, that this can be financially feasible, that it can scale, and that will just come from part of your research, as Alvaro was saying. Now, for the other question, will people get mentorship in finance and in other areas, actually, Alvaro?
So what we are setting up, what we're going to have ready, is for teams that make it to the semifinal stage, we will offer you the ability to have a one-on-one session with an expert in the idea that you're targeting. If you're thinking about energy infrastructure, decarbonization, the energy sector, we'll pair you up with somebody that works in the space, that understands the space, and that will be able to give you some feedback on your idea, on whether it's actually something that could actually materialize. If your idea addresses agriculture or farming, we'll find an expert in that space, and we'll try to set up a sit down so that you're able to get feedback. So it'll be a sort of a sector by sector type expert feedback.
Fantastic. Then Simon is asking us, adding to Victor's question, have any winners or projects been financed by investors or groups?
There's interest. I don't think any of the ideas from last year, any of the ideas that made it to the end were financed, but there was certainly interest in being able to pursue those further. We are hearing a lot from industry that there is interest they are interested in seeing what ideas make it to the end, and potentially bringing on students on board to a corporate to try to continue working on those ideas. So there is interest, and we're working on trying to set that up.
And yeah, fantastic. That's in addition to the grant that the winner or runner-up will get. So and that will of course come together with exposure to the judges, who are industry leaders, and other benefits. So Anais is asking us, does the competition only look for financing methods, or can we also come up with new business strategies and technologies?
Absolutely. As I said in the beginning, it's innovation. It could be innovation around finance. It can be innovation around business models. It could be innovation around technology. And it could also be innovation around all those three areas. Again, something to keep in mind is, is your idea feasible? If you begin to innovate in finance and business models and policy and technology, then the likelihood that your idea will get a good score in terms of feasibility, you're sort of hurting your idea. So just be mindful around how much innovation you want to sprinkle on your idea.
Yeah. And then our teams, anonymous attendee is asking us, are teams formed independently, or will there be a Tinder-like process for that?
Based on the way things worked last year, I would encourage you to find your teams individually. So you do it yourself. At your university, folks that the alternative is sort of what we're trying to do with the LinkedIn group is that you will be able to find others that don't have a team and that are looking for a team. And so we are beginning conversations in the LinkedIn group for folks to be connected. So we will be trying to connect the dots for those that don't have a team. But I would encourage you to think about having a local team, because that facilitates working together, that facilitates putting together material before the deadlines and so on.
Yeah, and the deadline is less than 3 weeks away now, so it can be a team as small as 2 people. We saw one of the cases that Philippe presented today with 2 PhD students. So yeah, the suggestion is just get going. You can always bring more people on board as the idea starts developing and before the deadline. But yeah, if you want to bounce ideas, meet more people, drop a post in the LinkedIn group. That's why we have created it. So there is connections among all of us. One more question that we have is from Simon. He says, climate change and software innovation do not normally go hand in hand. In the past, have there been any interesting ideas that involve software or technology innovation of any kind?
Short answer is yes. There were more than a handful of ideas last year that brought together innovation around technology, innovation around AI, innovation around big data, and employing those areas, those technologies in a climate in a climate setting, to reduce emissions or to help communities adapt better to climate change. Without going into the detail, but absolutely yes. There were more than a handful of ideas that focused on tech innovation, big data innovation, AI innovation.
Yes, and honestly, here the advice is whatever you're curious about that has an impact on climate that can be solved with innovative financial mechanisms, solutions, structures, products, go for it. Go for it. Any questions you have, you can always chat with us in the LinkedIn group, and we can provide any feedback, guidance, connections, anything that we can do for you between now and the application deadline, which is February 21st. I think that's all the questions we have in the chat, Alvaro. Any final word of advice for the applicants that you can give them today?
So we've got a few minutes left, but the last thing I'll say is go on our website, have a look at the top 5 ideas, which are available in the 2020 results page. Take a few minutes to listen to the proposals from each team, and then flip through the presentation decks, which are also available online. That'll give you a good idea of the sorts of challenges and issues that the teams were focused on. Again, those are sort of a final product, so just be mindful that your concept note might not go into that level of detail. But definitely use the resources that are available on our website. Join the LinkedIn group to see more updates. Subscribe to our newsletter so you can have a bit more of inspiration that we'll be sharing on a weekly basis. And other than that, thank you for joining, and we look forward to receiving your submissions in about 2.5, 3 weeks time.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alvaro. Thank you, everyone at the Climate Investment Challenge team, and thank you for joining us. We look forward to your applications.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.